Hello, I'm Sadi. In this video, I will be speaking about the English curriculum and teaching methodologies in the middle school grades. In the earlier webinar, I had spoken about the nature of the subject, where the focus had been the purposes of language, such as comprehension, communication, and expression, and the traditional breakdown of language into the four key skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. In this webinar, the focus will be on what are the topics that are taught in each of the middle school grades, right from grades 6 to 8, and how and why they are taught at their respective ages. The overall approach to teaching English in middle school is one of revising and strengthening the foundations of language that was set down in primary, and then extending on this to build newer, more reflective, more analytical, and more evaluative language skills in comprehension and expression, skills which are needed for grade 9 and 10 IGCSE assessments. For learning taking place at the grade 6 and 7 level, tasks that have already been done at grade 3, 4, and 5 level are repeated with slightly more complex variations. For example, instructional texts were earlier written for recipes, or earlier in younger grades, explanation texts were learnt as texts that explain the life cycle of a frog, let's say, simple phenomena, or the water cycle. But in middle school, these tasks might be written to explain subject content to peers or more complex phenomena with a greater emphasis on awareness on purpose and audience. The focus here is to revise students' understanding of language and literature texts, as well as to draw their attention to these particular aspects: audience, purpose, tone, and style, which is unique to each kind of text. What becomes more important as students go to higher grades is the awareness of the craft of language. Are they able to see how the writer manipulates language to create a certain intended effect? Are they able to zoom out from the text and observe its stylistic features and appreciate what is happening at the level of their comprehension? However, having said that, I would like to stress upon the fact that at middle school, the focus is still on enjoyment of language, also, more than analysis, as students are still at an acquisitional stage. And it is important that they are exposed to as much variety of language and literature text types as possible. They need to be able to see how different writers write, even when writing the same kind of text type. They need to see the same language features being used to create different effects in different text types to produce different results. Such as, for example, alliteration can be used both in poetry and in newspaper headlines. But in one, alliteration is used to create beauty, whereas in another, in newspaper headlines, alliteration is used to grab the reader's attention. So they need to be able to see this and replicate the impact that was created on the reader. This is also an age where conversations are important in order to build self esteem, in order to build sequential logical thinking, as well as to improve their basic verbal analysis. Conversations help in exploration and appreciation of literary forms. Students find validation when their analysis is acknowledged. They find, the formality of debates a refreshing outlet. So all of these types of speaking aspects are also very important for the middle school grades. This is an age when students develop a more complex and mature understanding and appreciation of English language in general. So, what guides the curriculum decisions of English language learning at Nahar International School? It's the Cambridge Curriculum Framework. This is a series of learning objectives that Cambridge outlines as the standard for language learners at each stage of their growth. However, we will be looking at English language learning as a series of topics suggested by Cambridge to achieve the required learning objectives in the set grades. So, the three key areas that we will focus on are reading and writing topics, speaking and listening topics, and grammar topics. Reading and writing skill objectives are assessed through fiction and non fiction. Speaking and listening are addressed through separate topics, especially designed for these skills, but also throughout the learning taking place, speaking and listening, reading and writing take place at simultaneous times. Understanding and application of grammar is also done simultaneously to be learned in context while doing the reading part or while doing the writing part when we study fiction and non-fiction text. Anyway, moving on to grade 6 teaching, the reading and writing topics are science fiction and fantasy stories, descriptive writing, instructional texts, leaflets, letters, and poetry. I'll let you read that for a bit. Through science fiction and fantasy narratives, students are given the opportunity to read a variety of texts from this genre. So, the idea is for them to be able to look at how different writers deal with science fiction and fantasy. How do they create different worlds, create different moods and atmospheres, although apparently it's from the same genre? What descriptive vocabulary is used to craft a setting that the reader can visualize? For fantasy, students might be given excerpts from Harry Potter or from Lord of the Rings or from Narnia to explore setting creation. For science fiction, students might look at the worlds of Terry Pratchett. This is a this is an opportunity for students to learn other aspects associated with narrative writing also, such as point of view, from whose perspective is the story being told. Um, Descriptive writing as a topic is also studied under narrative writing very often because stories require description. It When students learn descriptive writing through narration, it gives them a purpose to write descriptively for, and it's not just separately a text. They learn how to use figures of speech in the context of a particular genre, for example, such as using personification, maybe, uh, to describe, let's say, the sighing of the lonely mountains on a desolate planet, something like that. So, this becomes an enriching experience as students can see what impact figurative language actually creates as they see it in context. Moving on. Instructional texts have been taught in younger grades also, and they are continued in grade 6 in more interactive real world contexts. Students are served a problem, what instructions to give if a task has to become accomplished, such as giving instructions to a friend or a stranger to arrive at a particular place. These provide opportunities for speaking and listening activities also, as well as writing when the activity is noted down to help with the recall process. I'll let you read that for a bit. By grade 6, students have begun to be introduced to persuasion. With each successive grade, students are introduced to newer kinds of persuasive texts. This helps them understand how different audiences and texts require different tones, registers, structures. A teacher might help students understand what leaflets are by discussing advertisements, which they have already studied, and then getting them to make leaflets for their own imaginary businesses. So, the sense of autonomy that students get in thinking about such things as their own businesses or their own idea is very empowering and creative. It becomes a fun way to learn about the structure of a leaflet and how to design it, keeping in mind a certain kind of audience for their business. For example, the audience for an ice cream shop might be children, and hence they should use bright colors in their leaflet. They should use bold font, but they also should remember the kind of information that goes into a leaflet, such as a list of flavors or directions to a shop or a map or contact details, etc. So, those are things that come into a leaflet. Letter writing. This is one of the more organic and fluid forms of writing, and it is learned throughout the schooling journey, right from the youngest grades, alternating between formal and informal letters in different grades. Very often, this task, letter writing, is used as an extension to a text type that is being learned. For instance, um, when narratives are being learned, students might, be asked to write a letter to one of the characters or to imagine themselves as one of the characters in a science fiction story and write a letter to a friend describing the planet they're on or something like that. So it becomes a very fluid task that can be built upon based on other texts. Poetry is mentioned in the list. A little poetry is taught at every grade, since it's important that students have some access to literature at every level. So, poetry also serves to lighten the stress between studying heavy aspects of language, and aspects such as structure, point of view, audience, etc. Because poetry is more enjoyable and it opens up a whole new experimental way of working with language. So, in grade 6, students might explore different experimental forms such as concrete poetry or blackout poetry or spoken word poetry, etc. As you must have noticed, grammar is taught in conjunction with the study of language and literature texts, since grammar is best learnt in context rather than isolation. So, all the parts of speech, they're often called attention to while studying English in general, such as the use of varied adjectives in descriptive writing or flowery adverbs in leaflets. Grammar topics such as direct and indirect speech, however, are very specific to a certain type of text and can only be studied when studying those texts, such as stories where dialogue takes place. And the rules for punctuating dialogue need to be maintained. Clauses are difficult grammatical concepts and they must be regularly revised in every grade, especially while studying larger texts like narratives or letters. Letter writing is an important uh, space to learn to use conditionals, if and then statements, or not only but also statements, since letters are essentially conversations that are more formally set down in writing. Looking at speaking and listening, these skills are enhanced along with working on reading and writing. Every discussion that takes place in class is essentially an activity designed to provide students with an opportunity to listen attentively or to find aspects in the conversations to respond to meaningfully and to do all of this fluently and with clear organization. However, there are still certain things that are done, especially as speaking and listening tasks. So certain text types are, designed so that they become speaking and listening tasks, such as when an instructional text is turned into a speaking task, students are expected to provide directions to a stranger to find a location. Or, poetry when students write their experimental poems and recite them. Some language tasks, however, are essentially naturally speaking and listening tasks, such as a talk or a speech. So, although students might learn the structure of a talk in writing, they will learn this topic as a speaking activity. Students will be exposed to multiple examples of talks, such as TED Talks, by inspiring young entrepreneurs or budding change makers. They'll be asked to focus on the features of the talk. For example, how did they begin their talk? Did they use a question? Did they use a quote? Did they move on to a personal anecdote? Do they use humor? Uh, then they try and incorporate these into their own talks, which will take place at the end of studying the topic. Moving on from grade 6 to grade 7. When we come to grade 7, our focus moves from building skills required um, in the bridge between primary to middle to now building skills that are required at a checkpoint level, which is lower secondary assessment, but also for the eventual IGCSE examinations at the end of grade 10. However, we don't also want to restrict them because of exam requirements like checkpoint or IGCSE. So we ensure that we include those aspects of language learning that a student might need even at A levels, which is grade 12, or IBDP, which is a different curriculum altogether, and grade 12, or even later for more general applications in life. So we include text types like graphic narrative. I'll let you read that for a bit. Text types like graphic narrative are texts that students might study at the IBDP level. But even more importantly, why these texts are important is because they give students an access to a completely new kind of text type. Through a graphic novel, students learn how to navigate visual movement, to gain meaning of the text and extract enjoyment from the text. They suddenly learn that meaning is present even in the placement of panels, and that even such things as number of panels and size of panels is important to conveying the narrative that the creator wants. Although an entire graphic novel might not be taught, excerpts from different graphic novels might be explored. Firstly, to show students that this is an increasingly growing form of literature, and secondly, to allow them appreciation of visual narrative styles, such as excerpts from Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis or Joe Sacco's Palestine. Magazine articles again. Magazine articles are studied right from younger grades, as mentioned. However, magazine articles are a vast topic under which the potential to study multiple purposes, such as articles written to inform about travel destinations, or to entertain with gossip, or articles written to review a book, or articles written to discuss a political event. Different kinds of magazine articles are studied in different grades, depending on the suitability of the age. What is important is that students understand what purpose an article is being written for, who their audience is, and hence what tone do they need to adopt to reach their audience. So, teachers might teach magazine articles in various ways. One of the ways of studying any text type is through discussion, and teachers might use discussion to help students to identify the features of a text type and then cater to these. Discussion serves as an opportunity for extracting learning through relaxed questioning, internal conversation, and combined responses then that make up the final answer. Or the online nature of study has showed us that there are so many platforms in which we can have conversations. One of these platforms is Parley Ideas, which we've used, which allows students to comment on each other's discussion ideas. And there is a sense of democracy in the way students respond to each other's comments. And the online nature of this discussion, because it makes students feel more confident about commenting and not being viewed in a certain way, and they feel confident contradicting, which they might perhaps not feel so in a physical space. Moving on, explanatory texts. The purpose of teaching explanation texts is to allow students to see that all kinds of texts around them, even science textbooks, are actually language texts, which are especially designed to communicate a certain meaning through a certain structure and a certain tone. When students were studying magazine articles, they were constantly reminded to use their own opinions. But when students study explanatory texts, they are told to restrict opinion. It's not about opinion, it's about the process. And this is a difficult thing that students must do, realize what tone and what register and what content is allowed and not allowed in different text types. Students study explanatory text by looking at things that fascinate them, things that occur in the world, magazine articles that are about things like aurora borealis or the process of mummification or anything else that fascinates them. And they go through multiple explanatory texts to understand how to write these. Explanation also lends itself very well to speaking and listening tasks because explanations are originally verbal, right? Students can be divided into groups where each group comes up with a set of questions for another group, and then that group has to answer questions about a process. Hence, it turns into an explanation in response to questions. But what is an interesting thing that a teacher further does at times is to make students think about the whole process of questioning. So, the teacher can provide students with a set of marks to assess what are the components of a good question itself. At the end, students can gauge the success of their questioning as well as the other group's questions by rating the quality of their questions based on a certain set of rubrics that the teacher provides. Such metacognitive tasks are very helpful for overall development of children's intellectual ability. Tasks where students carry out, a language task, but then zoom out and then look at the process that they undertook to achieve that task. And when the teacher provides them with the parameters for what could have made it better, that's really helpful. At this moment, the teacher is providing them with a scaffolding, firstly to identify their own thinking processes, and then to help them scrutinize these processes by providing them with the tools, such as rubrics which provide standards of quality and how you can improve on them. So this is a key aspect of learning at middle grades level. Letter writing. As mentioned earlier, letter writing is a fluid organic text type and presents itself in multiple grades. Through letter writing, teachers initiate occasions for real world communication, teaching children practical written communication skills that they will need for years to come. So, teachers often make students write actual tangible physical letters, which are then mailed either to classmates or batchmates or even to a famous personality or to a pen pal. Recently, our grade 7 teacher got students to be pen pals with refugees from different countries in order to learn about different cultures and also to spread some joy. Poetry analysis becomes stronger as students go to higher grades. Students move from identifying rhyme and structure to now appreciating sound and meaning, both explicit and implicit, both literal and figurative. Exploring different poets and poems and then appreciating and critiquing them gives students a sense of power, of choice. They realize that they can decide what poems they like and analyze reasons for doing so. But it is important that first they be exposed to variety. Students need to read more and read often to be able to exert choice. So, this is also the birth of their own creative processes when they choose to emulate a poetic style because they like it and then they make it their own because the simplicity or the complexity appeals to them. Poetry provides speaking opportunities in the form of recitation as well as speaking assessments when students decide to speak about their favorite poems and explain why they choose it as their favorite. Um, as mentioned, explanations also can be in the form of speaking and listening topics. Since verbal language tasks become more and more prominent in each successive grade, it is important that students know of speaking tasks that also come with rules, but for speaking. Just as writing tasks come with rules for writing, speaking tasks that come with rules for speaking. Participating in, say, organized debates can be a very exhilarating learning experience for students since for the first time they are allowed to argue, but according to the rules, according to the time limit, according to set standards of accepted argumentation. And rules liberate students by providing them official freedom. It's a significant part of growing up that students learn. They learn to argue, but while abiding by the norms. This helps them learn to see school as a microcosm of society, which operates under rules and reinforces rules of society. And secondly, they learn to see that there are appropriate ways of communicating dissent and convincing another person. Right. Moving on to grammar. As mentioned earlier, each of the grammar topics is revised while teaching language and literature texts. Grammar makes most sense when it is studied in context. This helps students see why grammar rules are required and what impact they can have on accuracy and comprehension of a text. As mentioned earlier, connectives especially are useful during explanatory text where a sequence of information is conveyed or in debates when words like nevertheless, furthermore are used to communicate the strength of the argument. Grammar concepts such as subject verb agreement and voice are constantly revised, but especially during longer text types. Simple, compound, complex sentences are revised throughout, but since these are complex, varied sentence structures, they're revised better through magazine article writing, which are longer texts, or explanatory texts, which are longer texts. Moving on, finally, to grade 8. We have come to the class that is closest to the exam grades of IGCSE. At this point, teachers might start feeling the pressure of ensuring that the foundations of language learning are laid in the best way possible by grade 8 so that students can spend the time building upon these in grades 9 and 10. However, this is still done by exploring complex language and literature texts and not restricting to requirements of grade 9 and 10. So let's look at what's studied in grade 8 in terms of reading and writing topics. I'll give you a moment to read that. Magazine article writing is made fun by looking at something like travel writing. IGCSE exams often use passages about travel experiences since they are highly detailed in description and have a clear voice of the writer, which students need to see often and understand. However, at the grade 8 level, this is studied more in a fun manner where students read multiple travel articles and even write their own, learning features of travel writing and at the same time mimicking them in their own writing. English classes allow for so many opportunities to do wonders for the soul, not just through literary appreciation, but also through opportunities for self expression, which can be cathartic, therapeutic in nature, even when, or especially when, writing in the voice of another person. Just like magazine articles, reflective texts like writing diaries or journals allows for choice, for autonomy, since there is freedom from structures now. And the content is also very subjective and dependent upon the student's choice. Since children are happy with autonomy and like writing these texts, children teachers use this opportunity to focus on sentences of longer lengths and improve the use of clauses also. Other texts that allow students personal choice is story writing. Students enjoy using their imagination to create fascinating storylines, as we already discussed while talking about science fiction and fantasy. They like creating interesting characters or mesmerizing settings. When teachers teach them rules for story writing, it only makes them more keen to write, knowing that there is a formula and there is a structure to make writing interesting, and it's not just by chance. Figures of speech are learned in great depth in grade 8. If you can see, there's a whole lot of figures of speech mentioned here: alliteration, hyperbole, personification, oxymoron, euphemism, irony, antithesis, juxtaposition. These, because students need to be familiar by now with how writers achieve effects through, say, figures of speech, for instance, which they'll be assessed on in IGCSE assessments. And stories are a great place to learn about figures of speech, as you've just seen. But many of the figures of speech are actually learned through poetry, especially understanding how metaphors are extended, which is a very high level comprehension skill. A poem like Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is helpful in understanding something like extended metaphor through much emotional depth. Other poets that might be studied could be Auden or Eve Merriam or Billy Collins, or even others whose works lend themselves specifically to understanding figurative language. Report writing. This is the complete opposite of diary writing and stories because it's an extremely formal, restrictive kind of writing style which is bound by rules and is for a very specific purpose. There are formal reports and there are newspaper reports. Formal reports are written to report to an authority about details of an event that has taken place or a place that was visited or an action that was taken, and it requires students to learn how to modify their tone to be official and respectful to this higher authority. Newspaper reports, on the other hand, are reports that report news. They have a very rigid structure as well, which must be followed for it to have a similar impact as newspaper articles that are written around the world. And students find it difficult to replicate this very standard, expected style of writing, which creates a certain kind of impact on the reader. But in this challenge also lies a joy because they like to be able to achieve the challenge and write impressive newspaper articles. Speeches are a persuasive text. I'll just let you read the points. Persuasion is a purpose that students are taught right from grades 4 and 5. One of the best ways to understand persuasive techniques of ethos, pathos, and logos is through studying advertisements, as I've mentioned earlier, and seeing how they persuade us viewers to buy their products or their services. This is also done in the lower grades, but we also do it in higher grades because it's one of the best ways of reintroducing persuasion. Figures of speech such as repetition and antithesis are taught through speeches as well, since they are a key aspect of this text type. For instance, the repetition in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. It's the classic example of repetition in speeches. Or Abraham Lincoln's speech shows some antithesis when he says, when there is need of silence, you speak, and when there is need of speech, you are dumb. Students enjoy seeing the power that figurative language has to sway an audience's beliefs, and they realize that language can be manipulated to evoke a certain planned response from the audience. So, this is the beginning of a very intelligent understanding of language usage and human cunning in general, making them more mature users and consumers of language. As in grade 7, sorry, uh, grammar topics, as mentioned, are taught through context. Active and passive voice is revised through report writing. Clauses, subject, predicate are revised through larger pieces of writing such as magazine articles, speech, letter, report, and diary writing. Although this is repetitive, it is just to show that there is awareness of grammar topics. They are taught, they are reinforced, but only in context along with teaching other text types. And once they're reinforced, there are separate grammar worksheets also carried out just to do a sort of revision. It's not as if grammar is not done separately, but once it has been reinforced. Debates continue to be used as speaking tasks because they have learned that there are rules for arguing. Now they understand the format of a debate better. They start understanding the perspectives of others and developing their arguments better. They start learning strategies. Play scripts are made just as in really lower grades. Students enjoy making play scripts. They're provided opportunities to adopt the voice of a character and display emotion in a different persona. Opportunities for doing play scripts come while studying narratives also, as students can convert existing stories into scripts and see the change that occurs as settings change into set or props, or emotions, change into stage directions. While studying speeches and learning how to write them, students are also given opportunities to make speeches on topics that they strongly believe in. The school provides them platforms to present talks to an audience, such as our very popular and successful TED events that we have. So, to conclude, all of middle school teaching is actually preparation for both the board exams that are going to come at the grade 10 level as well as a grade 12 level. But more importantly, this is preparation for life. These are years when students are shown ways of building language skills by being shown that there are rules for all kinds of things, even creative things like storytelling. As they're growing up to become, archetypal rebellious teenagers that we see externally, they are also imbibing the rules for becoming mature adults and learning that rules are required for both coherence and beauty. Just as in other subjects, in English too, middle school learning incorporates the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But there are different UN SDGs catered to in each grade. There are three different UN SDGs incorporated in grade 6, 3 in grade 7, and 3 in grade 8. Teachers ensure that English is taught, no doubt. But this teaching includes awareness and empathy towards inequalities and sufferings that most people in the world face. Teachers also show the possibilities of action through language learning. So, if you had to look at awareness uh, being brought about, studying news reports about a recent, heart wrenching event, a world event, or studying stories from the perspectives of characters in conflict zones. This helps increase students' awareness. They become aware of these issues in the world, and the different quality of life that people live in. But if we had to look at action, how do teachers get students to think of action? Then writing letters to refugees or giving talks about issues that they are passionate about makes them realize that there is a real potential for real change. And it can start at a very small personal level, and that each of them possesses that capacity to make a change. And that's the power of language. So, with this note about the power of language, I will end the video. I hope it has helped you understand what is taught in middle school grades in English and how. If you have any further questions, please feel free to put it into the Google form that we have shared with you. Thank you.